Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Welcome back to the Classroom Narratives podcast, the space where we help teachers identify and implement strategies that engage students with curriculum while upholding both academic rigor and emotional connection. I'm your host, Dr. Joey Weisler, and in this series of segments, I'm so excited to prepare for the launch of my first book. Woohoo! And my book is titled Teaching with Heart and Soul, Purposeful Practices for Teaching the Child Beyond the Brain. So throughout the summer and fall of 2026, for those tuning in real time, I'm going to be releasing some evergreen segments that share exclusive writer's insights, annotated commentary, and backstories to the process of bringing this work to life. And my hope is that each segment in this bundle will further equip you for the work that you're doing in our classrooms every day. And I know that the latest buzzwords in education are to build relationships and focus on self-care. The intention is there, I know it really is, but while we're directed to do these things, we're never really taught how to do them. And that's why career fatigue has become unsustainable for those still in the profession. So in my first year of teaching, I went back to my kindergarten teacher, and she told me a secret, and I want to share it with you throughout this entire thread of episodes in this Heart series here. Whether you're teaching elementary school or college classes, science or humanities subjects, the secret that was given to me will transform the heart of your work, and it saved my ability to continue in my dream job of teaching. Are you still with me? Good. Now step into our classroom community and get yourself settled. It's time to talk about teaching the child to the heart beyond the brain. Okay, so for those of you who know me well, you know that I'm absolutely not a swearer, but I want to begin by sharing a classroom memory from my first year of teaching during a time that I was teaching Elie Wiesel's Holocaust memoir, Night. So I distinctly remember during this time that I had a student who turned to her classmate and she said very unkindly and with some four-letter words sprinkled throughout, "I don't care about this class." That was her core message. And at first I felt personally injured by the statement, but as I sat with those emotions, I began to resonate, well, why should she care? I wasn't teaching authentically as quote unquote Mr. Weisler. Instead, I was teaching as someone trying to perform to a pacing guide while making sure that I was still hitting on all the standards. And even while reading one of the most gripping accounts of historical tragedy, I still fell short of finding ways to make my students personally connect and want to care about what they were learning. Because let's face it, maybe a vocabulary worksheet wasn't exactly what the student was looking for that day to feel like they were a part of the classroom community. So this experience began leading me down a journey and thinking about, well, then what do students care about? And what does it mean to actually get them to want to be a part of a learning community? I'm going to fast forward now by half a decade. So 5 years after that experience, I was teaching a college level business writing course. And the task was the same for this college level class as it was before. I had to write a syllabus that met the standards and the objectives of the course as given to me by the university. But then once I created original designed content, I had to teach what I created. And I could have easily created a syllabus for business writing that focused mostly on compliance, where students would spend an entire semester writing resumes, writing cover letters, corporate memos, and thank you letters. And while all of those tasks are incredibly useful and entirely relevant to include as part of a business communication curriculum, I felt as if I would be doing a disservice if I didn't enable my students to engage with those materials as part of their learning and actually do something with them. So what I did is that I created a term-long project where students designed and presented a tangible and original concept through business communication. Once students wrote resumes and cover letters in the opening weeks of the class, I then, as the instructor, would quote-unquote hire 4 team leaders in a class of 20. And those 4 team leaders who interviewed with me to get that role were then in charge by the third week of class of hosting an in-class job fair. And in practicing interviewing skills with their peers, those student leaders looked at their classmates' resumes and their cover letters as a way to literally, quote unquote, hire their classmates and form teams or organizations, if you want to call it as such, where they then had to communicate through letters, emails, memos, and all different means throughout the term between those who were in class and even those throughout the entire university who could help them form a concept. They were bridging cross departments to help make their vision come about. What this project did is that it offered students a playground for learning and experimentation where error became encouraged and students could actually use business communication and business writing to both articulate and elevate their ideas at hand. And I bring this up because a student this past semester wrote to me in the second week of class, and she said to me, I can't stop thinking about how excited I am for this project, and I want to make this the best experience for myself. Wow. So that started to really beg the question for me. Why would a term-long business writing project cause so much excitement, and yet Elie Wiesel's Holocaust memoir faced so much indifference? It's about how students see themselves as part of their learning, because students care about their learning when it feels tangible, when it feels scalable, and when it feels connected to what they want to accomplish. As educators, we often require what I call deliverables or something gradable through our classes, be it through an essay, an exam, maybe it's a homework assignment. But what if students are actually looking to provide a deliverable of their own that they feel is a fair and relevant representation to the outcomes that they want to gain from the course? That's where the E pillar in HEART comes into play, otherwise known as the engagement pillar. So there's two types of engagement that I want to share about. And the first type of engagement is what I call to be academic and intellectual engagement. And the second type of engagement is going to be called emotional engagement. And what I'm going to emphasize throughout the segment is that neither type of engagement, from intellectual to emotional, are superior to the other, and they both serve to invite students to become a part of their learning. And at the same time, negligence of teaching with both strategies won't make learning better or worse, but it will simply make the entire experience of learning feel incomplete. So then using both strategies in tandem, as I'll describe them, will exemplify whole person learning. So let's start with academic engagement. So many students come into class expecting to share a right or a wrong answer, and I fully agree that all responses should be in direct connection to the content at hand. Whenever students come into class and they start sharing ideas, the first thing that I'll ask them is, okay, point me back to the text. Where is your evidence? Especially in science classes, we'll ask this a lot. Where is your evidence? So in science, of course, it comes from the data. In math, it comes from the numbers. In literature, it comes from the reading. So when students are reading for my literature course, as an example, they're often underlining, they're highlighting, and they're annotating with the expectation that certain passages can be shared as part of a whole group conversation. But the extent of academic engagement can feel really limiting when students are responding to the point that they only want to share what they think is going to sound correct to them. And they start to avoid taking risks and negotiating with their peers because they don't want to sound wrong. And that's why in literature class, for example, I elevate that question of, well, what happened in the story, which is something that a reader can identify on their own, to why is that moment from the story something that matters to you? And it's those personal connections that students offer that create such a wide differentiation in responses. And this form of engagement creates a space where students start to think, interpret, question, and really seek to go just beyond giving an answer. And when this happens on a whole group level, where students are no longer just engaging to sound correct, their individual insights become a form of what I call to be intellectual negotiation. So then, what are some ways that we can phrase questions where students don't have to feel compelled to sound right? As an example, I may explain a really practical moment that happens within the text for a literature class, and then I'll follow it up by asking, well, then why would the character have done that? Or maybe I'll just ask the question, what was your greatest takeaway from such and such a moment? And students who know their stuff are going to sound extremely confident, i.e., the wants to have done the reading in order to participate, right? And yet at the same time, I emphasize to students that there really are no wrong answers when having students reflect, but there are responses that are more valid and less valid. And we'll talk about what that sounds like in a little bit. While students can create that first type of response, that academic response intellectually, I find that it's when they start to respond emotionally that they begin to see their whole selves as part of their learning. And emotional engagement is significant because once students start to connect their full selves to their learning, you've now stretched far beyond academic comprehension, and you've now designed the space for empathetic connection in what students are learning about. So many segments throughout this podcast series have retold the moment in which I taught of mice and men during my first year of teaching to my 8th grade class. And what happened during that time was that I assigned a journal where I had asked my students to recall a time in which they felt like that they were an outsider, anticipating that the question would connect them right back to the themes of the book. And what was meant to serve as a productive literary connection turned into this unhinged moment where students began expressing their personal pain into the center of the classroom, expecting me to help them find ways to make it all go away somehow. And when I brought my findings down to the administration, where I said, hey, listen, in class today, I learned that our students are depressed and suicidal, their answer was not, well, thank you for teaching of mice and men so nice to help them make those connections. The administration was in the right to say, what would have brought you to learn about them that way? Am I a lunatic for having posed the same question that I feel pivoted my entire career, not just again, but on multiple other occasions? Oh, plot twist. Not once I learned how to implement the question safely. The formula for emotional engagement is structured like this. I coined it to be called reveal, relate, justify. That's my three-part formula. Reveal, relate, justify. I begin by having students reveal the passage from the text. A guy can get so lonely he gets sick. Sometimes I'll give them the passage, but other times they'll find it themselves. We reveal that moment together. Then we can go ahead and relate by having students create a personal or emotional relation. The guy can get so lonely he gets sick. Okay, so then how does that moment help you relate to a moment that you have felt like an outsider before? Then students start to connect that through empathy and emotion. But then when they do so, we don't stop there. We find that equilibrium, we find that balance, because students will then justify why that response helps them understand the text deeper because of that experience. So then when students use the reveal, relate, justify pattern, that narrative bridge becomes stronger because of their lived experience. And if it's the emotion that they bring back into the text to say, this helps me relate to this moment because, that allows the classroom boundary to remain safely therapeutic, which means that students can think and feel good without delving into that dangerous territory of therapy, where emotions bleed into the center of the room. But that is only done when students take their feelings and connect it right back to the text and justify that. So even with that reveal, relate, and justify formula, students may still hesitate to engage in offering their responses because they don't want it to sound like they're giving a public confessional or even a performance and even making a spectacle of themselves. And my argument is that once we establish the habits of the room, students understand that they are never required, yet always invited to share those personal moments as a way to form deeper relations to the classroom community. And one method that I personally take on is that sometimes when I'm inviting students to share those vulnerable moments, I'll share an example of my own out loud as the first person to share in class. And my modeling establishes this invitation for those who really want to humanize themselves while still receiving both acknowledgement and validation from those that are also in the classroom with us. So now that you have an idea as to the two ways students engage, from intellectual to emotional engagement, I want to emphasize that one size does not fit all when it comes to student outputs. And this means that when we have students engage for a grade, I like to create spaces of multimodal learning, and I see that as a huge benefit to what they produce. Some students may prefer to write, some may want to speak, others may prefer artistic expression, such as drawing and design. And yes, of course, there are certain standards where maybe there is a task where students must create something using X amount of words, right? But I always like to think about how can I enable students to express themselves in a way that helps them feel the most capable and proud of the work that they want to do while still meeting the course standards. And students respond to that inquiry through the way that they then choose to engage. So the opposite of engagement is disengagement. And this again goes back to students resisting participation out of the fear of sounding wrong, either academically or again, avoiding that need to feel like they have to perform their feelings with emotional engagement. And my belief is that these two forms of learning should coexist in tandem. When intellectual and emotional learning exist distinctively, learning isn't bad, it's just incomplete. Let's use John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men again and talk about it as if it is only an intellectual experience. If that novel was taught to you through an intellectual experience, you may have a long-term understanding of the text, but you don't remember how it actually made you feel. On the contrary, if that text was taught to you emotionally, you may have a long-term memory as to that emotional experience with the story, but you don't remember why or what it actually meant to you. And maybe you don't remember how you comprehended the most important moments of that story as well. So again, both moments between intellectual and academic engagement become optimized when presented to students in tandem. And at the same time, this engagement pillar is a reminder that even silence is not a form of disengagement, but rather that's a form of student projection in itself. So what can we continue doing to avoid making students feel incompetent for sharing and making them feel like they have to stay silent, perhaps for that reason alone? We can simply continue inviting students into conversation and allowing whole group level feedback to just remain constructive and let their voice be validated and let them know that it matters. So, what does engagement look like in your classroom? That's not literature. Across subjects, it's about having students actively participate, not just comply with the learning. Maybe in math, this is having students explain their thinking and how they got to their answer. It could be having students look at multiple ways to solve a problem and even comparing their methods with one another. In science, this could look like problem solving. It could be participation during a lab. And of course, in ELA, as we said, this can be about focusing on discussion, written responses, choice and interpretation. And in elementary school, this can be using any of the multiple intelligences that help students become involved in their whole child learning. So then once students begin to determine that answer as to what does this mean to me, they'll start to understand that there is an ecosystem in a society that extends well beyond the representation of the classroom wall. And while the segment has offered tactics for thinking and feeling as a way to lead students to engage, it then becomes through a form of awareness that students start to question on a larger scale. Okay, well then, what should I be doing with this meaning that I've now made? And their ability to act on those thoughts offers a space for students to expand their thinking well beyond the classroom walls. The next pillar is going to be awareness. Stick around and learn what that's all about next. Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together, we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.